So there we go. I want to welcome everybody to the National Institute of Scientific Teaching Happy Hour. And today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Carrie Menke from UC Merced lead our happy hour. Dr. Menke is a friend and colleague that got her bachelor in physics from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville and her master's and PhD from the University of California in Irvine. Then she did a really interesting postdoc in the Department of Science at the Getty Conservation Institute in LA, at the Getty Museum, and where she was researching the applications of mass spectrometry, excuse me, to study native and foreign materials removed from bare on prime canvases during art conservation from the artwork of three artists, Kenneth Nolan, Frank Stella, and Maurice Lewis. So it's a really interesting application of physics to art. So it's very fascinating. She has been at UC Merced now as a teaching professor in physics. She's an award teaching professor. She recently got the Senate Award for Distinguished Undergraduate Teaching at UC Merced. And her interests involve physics education research, pedagogy and assessment, where she's evaluating the effectiveness of introductory physics classes. So with that, I would like to then, she disappeared for a second. When she comes back.
Sorry, I'm just closing a window because I live on a fairly busy street.
No, sorry, just that I was about to give you the photo and she disappeared from the camera. Anyway, with that, I will then pass the baton to Dr. Menke. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcos, for that lovely introduction. There we go. So I have some slides put together, and also I have automatic closed caption, and I don't know how to do that, don't know how to turn it off. Sometimes I get distracted by the things popping up. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to speak up while I'm chatting away. So let's see. So this all kind of happened, in terms of like students helping with the course structure, because I was scrambling trying to figure out what to do, and but it turned into this really interesting process, not only for the physics honors class that I was teaching, that was introductory physics 1 honors, but also for my introductory physics 2 large lecture course, although they didn't do a final project. So I'll talk about how just bringing them, the students in to just help with the structure, and so giving them some agency in how the course was going to be structured, because it was from the start an online class. And by the way, until the pandemic happened, I had no experience with running online classes. And so how the honor students did that, how we scaffolded it up, and also how something like this can be scaled to large enrollment courses, because that's how we typically do a research activity when we have our face-to-face classes. And then I have a couple of references and links for you if you're interested. Okay, there we go. So some of that wasn't supposed to show a bit. So it really happened throughout the summer. I was reading online about asynchronous versus synchronous. So many of our students are, having to work, take care of your younger siblings, and I didn't want them to be at a disadvantage if they weren't able to attend classes. And I, in general, just hate exams because an exam is a snapshot of what a student is going through at that moment, and not necessarily what they understand about the material. And so it really was kind of that day, and I had an idea, and so I'm like, you know what, it was the first day of classes, and I didn't have my syllabus put together, and really was in the middle of a freak out. And so I said, to myself, you know what, I'm going to actually ask my students for their input and how they actually want the class to be structured. Okay, so I put a draft of the syllabus together, and these are the standard components of the class I have. There's usually lecture prep and participation, the clicker questions, or little survey type stuff before lectures. When it's a face-to-face class, we use the Sapling online homework system, and typically with our lectures, we have a weekly Sapling quiz that's usually done in the discussion session. I was still trying to figure out how is that going to be doable. Last spring, we, as well as I think every other institution dealing with remote learning, when they're, you know, that shift, that emergency shift to remote learning, there were issues of academic integrity, students using check, things like that. I wasn't quite sure how to do that. How are we going to use the online discussion boards? I had ideas about that, but wasn't about how to do that asynchronously, but hadn't used discussion boards for discussion in prior semesters. In all of our introductory physics classes, we do some kind of research activity. It's gone through a lot of different iterations, but right now students pick a topic that they want to learn more about, find peer-reviewed journal articles about that, write a couple of annotations, and then do a presentation to their peers. And we have been able to scale that up, and we have discussion sessions associated with the lecture. The discussion sessions are an hour and 15 minutes long, and our discussion sessions have about 24 students max in a room. And we have been, so with that, we're able to have every single one of our students, regardless of how large those classes are, actually give a presentation. So even at that level, they're able to get public speaking experience, which is cool. And then progress checks was kind of an idea I had instead of an exam, and so I wanted to find out about how the students were thinking about this idea. And so anyways, so I was like, so here's part of the watermark on that image for draft syllabus. I posted it, and we talked about it in our first class. And then I used we use Canvas for our learning management system. And so I asked the students, like, what do you think about this? How do you think we're going to be able to do this? How do you think about, progress checks versus exams? What do you think about quizzes? And then based on the feedback of things, we changed the percentages. So you can see that it's crossed out, like lecture prep and participation went from 20 to 25%. Homework dropped down because we decided to scrap the quiz because the progress checks would kind of take the place of the quiz. And the idea of the progress check was ultimately what I want, and I think every instructor wants for their students, is to understand the material. And that doesn't always happen according to the course schedule. So it's introductory physics 2, so electricity, magnetism, and in optics. So if a student is having trouble understanding electric field and electric potential, so with electric potential, think batteries and volts. An electric field is something that's quite different than conceptually than what they've done in the first semester. So if they don't get that by the time of like the first midterm, then it really kind of clings to it weighs their course grade down. But if they get it by the end of the semester, if it just takes some time to click, but they get it by the end of the semester, I'm ecstatic because they got it. That's the goal. So progress checks were based on, it was trying to be an opportunity for students to kind of revisit material and get credit for finally getting it. And I was really struggling, how is that going to be scalable, keep my workload in check? And honestly, that kind of turned into a bit of a hot mess. But like a lot of brand new things that I try to do too much new stuff all at once, and that became overwhelming. But in the process of this, the students in the discussion board really liked that they were able to ask questions about these different things. Voice their concerns about progress checks, how that would work. and ask about like how the discussion session would work and with the discussion boards, and expressed a lot of appreciation in it, and it got a lot of buy-in. So this was the very first time I actually had students participating at this level. I'm thinking that a number of you have like, well, yeah, of course, we build this community, we have this conversation, like having principles of community with conversations in classes, like there's that. But this was the first time I had done something like this, and with some of these new ideas. And students were very used to having exams and quizzes and homework. So the fact that progress checks were different unsettled quite a few of them. So in my Physics 1 honors course, I had 13 students enrolled. And as the semester progressed, they're like, with the progress checks, they really wanted a final exam, but not really an exam. And one of the students, had asked for a one-on-one meeting with me. And so she said, what about this, the idea is that with a final project, like, what if we teach something? Like, what if we teach something? And the idea is that if you can teach it, then you've learned it. And she had some ideas about it, and she had already talked to some of her classmates about it. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great idea. And I love that it was student initiated. And this happened on about mid-October that it was that she asked to talk with me about it. And but I was feeling extremely overwhelmed at that point and wanted it to be student driven and keep my workload in check. And I also had a fantastic graduate student TA that I had worked with multiple times before, and who also really liked active learning and getting the students involved in stuff. And her name is Ritu is her nickname. So Ritu and I talked about, like, what do you think about this, and how can we do this? And we wanted it to be mostly done within class time, so that because the students knew what that schedule would be, and they ideally should be available. And so what we did is our discussion sessions are an hour and 50 minutes. So we gave them like the last 20 or so minutes of about 3 discussion sessions in a row, and said, so here's the idea. It's going to be your presentation, you're going to teach some part of it. And so what are going to be the project requirements? How is this going to affect the weight of the course and shifting some of the other weights? And then how are you all going to be graded on this? And so we gave them time with that, and they came up with it. And so some students were interested in working on the rubric. Some of the students were interested in working on the requirement. So they split up into these groups to focus on one of these 3 aspects. And this did work because it was a smaller class, and so there was a lot of cross talk and conversation that could easily happen. We also had discussion boards on our Canvas site, so people could chime in with various things. So they did this. We did give them a rubric that we use for our physics senior thesis presentations as a basis, and that is actually based on the AAC&U value rubric for oral communication. So that's our senior thesis presentations based on that. And that's also what our in a regular face-to-face class, our research activity presentation rubric is based on that. And so they had a starting place, and it's a descriptive rubric. And so they're like, can we work in groups? I'm like, yeah, you can work in groups for the presentation. But I also, part of the project requirements were you need to make sure that if somebody's working by themselves or people working in groups, like there's nobody's put at a disadvantage. So how is it fair for somebody doing it solo versus working in groups? So they discussed this in discussion sessions, and then gave me kind of like a draft, and I put everything together into instructions, and it was up for discussion. So I'm curious, how many of you And let's see if I'm looking at the little, so I have another screen over here. Okay. So whether it's like the reactions with a thumbs up or raise hand, stuff like that, how many of you have incorporated students into a course structure decision like this, like actually affecting the syllabus? I'm wondering how many of you have done something like this. And I'm looking over here because I've, okay, some yeses and some nos. Yeah, cool. Really cool. And for those of you that have, would any of you be willing to, let me stop sharing this for a moment. Would any of you be willing to share some of your experiences having students actually be part of the course structure? Stasnos?
Yes. Actually, I allow my students to determine every aspect of the grade. I give them first day. If they have a say into what happens to the learning, they have to have a say in every aspect of the course, all the way down to the types of exams they have, etc. I tell them, here are the parameters, here are the learning objectives and why these are the learning objectives. And then I'll let them decide how they want to do. And they choose to have like open book exams, for example, or group exams, all of the resources, all that stuff. The learning is the objective here. And I tell them, if you're going to open book exams, I'm not going to give you a question, what is the mitochondria, right? It's going to be a different question that we ask every day in class. So you make the assessment part that they determine they're happy with part of the teaching. So then I adjust my teaching to make sure the questions that will be asked and answered in the exam will be reflected on the teaching. But they have ownership of this. They determine every aspect of this. And I ask them to be fair, transparent. How would someone from the outside know that we were fair to all of you?
So you said mitochondria. So do I gather that this is a bio class that you teach? And how
Class, yes.
large is it?
It varies anywhere from sometimes from 12 to 24.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
still smaller.
Yes.
Somebody else that does this, are you willing to share? And do you have the option to unmute yourself? I'm not sure about that.
They should be able to unmute themselves, yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Marcos. Amy, yes?
I have students help me set a rubric.
Is it for the
example,
class or an assignment?
What makes a good presentation?
Mhm.
How much should delivery count? How much should content count? What about slides? What makes for a good slide? What if you make a great slide and never point to it? You know, so we have these discussions about presentations, and then we have a list. And year after year, we arrive around the same kind of rubric. You know, that content is important, but delivery is also important. Also engagement with the class, so they have activities. And boy, with Zoom, they've taught me a lot of new activities, jam boards, and all kinds of things that I haven't really used. And they're really engaged. And I found that what that does is there's no mystery about what I'm looking for. And that everybody's idea of excellence pretty much is the same. Mm-hmm. So, but they feel really engaged, and it's not something thrown at them. It's something they have some power over.
Yeah, and is this also for what size class is this for?
This is a class of usually around 12, and it's advanced students, and there's a lot of presentation involved. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I actually do have, it's a hidden slide, but I can show you later. It is the rubric that we use in our introductory physics classes for their research activity presentation. And we have it structured so that we understand, we tell the students, we realize that this could be the very first class you've ever taken, you know, first semester, first year class. And so is like, if you present, you automatically start with a C- grade. Like, you automatically pass if you present. And so everything else is just, you know, bonus, and we found it to be really quite successful, and the rubrics posted. So okay, so was there anything anybody else want to share anything before I go back to the slides? Okay. Again, if anything pops up while in the meantime, just feel free to speak up. And if you happen to have a cat or puppy that shows up in your video, then it's bonus, for at least for me. Okay, so I really liked the this whole process with the students, and so the rubric that they started off with, it was a descriptive rubric, and it had like novice, benchmark, milestone, and capstone. These are the basic criteria, and the students started off with that, and they modified it, and they even had ways of, if there was students that were working in a group, like the requirement was that every student in the group had to be part of the presentation in some way. And for the capstone element for the central message was that the group members had to be really coordinated with each other in how they were presenting. Like, it had to be practiced. All right, Maureen, cat, yes, it's a pretty kitty. I'm sorry, I'll focus now. And so I was really, really pleased with how they worked with the rubric and asked questions about it. So they decided that the final project would be 20% of their grade. And then the other ones were shifted. And they decided that, so they were deliverables, the presentation itself, and that they would also have practice problems. Now, these would be problems that they chose so that their classmates could practice the material that was presented, and that they also needed to provide solutions to their own problems. And so those were the deliverables, and they decided on the weight, and also the presentation was the bulk of it. And to make it easier, so it was a 8-minute presentation baseline, and then there were 4 additional minutes for each additional person that was in the group, and I think 3. The largest group that we had was with 3 people. And they wanted to know, like, can we do breakout rooms? Can we do polls? Can we have clicker questions, stuff like that? And I said, breakout rooms is going to be a little bit too difficult, because as we're, it's you can't monitor when people are in breakout rooms. I said, but you can absolutely do polls and with clicker questions and stuff like that. And, totally allowed. And I said, as the, I'll be like your co-pilot in terms of with the video, that I'll run the clicker polls. And I have what I did is just in the class, I have a generic clicker poll, like if it's A through C, A through D, A through E, and so it's just generic. So it could be used that way. And then for the questions that they needed to, their practice problems that they needed to submit, each student needed to submit 1 multiple choice question and 1 word problem. Those were submitted on a discussion board so that their classmates could see it and try it out. And then they had to solve their own. And I wanted the questions to be rich questions. And I was also at the time really struggling to keep up with finding good problems for the weekly discussion board with the 2 classes that I was teaching, in addition to running online intro labs. And so I was like, you know what we can do is we can use our weekly discussion board and the credit to have you practice choosing problems to go with whatever topic you're going to use. So what you'll do is you'll find questions that relate to the topics that we are studying in lecture. And so that really lightened my workload. And so we talked about what makes for a good question. And so we talked about things like learning objectives and also Bloom's taxonomy. So I need to shrink this little window down over here so I can see. Okay, so So in one of the lectures, again, this was a small class, so I had this posted and we talked together about Bloom's taxonomy. I said, you know, there's no cut and dry, there's definitely overlap. And together as a class, we took a couple examples from like homework questions from the homework assignment and talked about where, you know, we would where the students thought it would go onto Bloom's taxonomy. And some students, you know, would rate it one way, some students would rate it another, but it was pretty close. And so we talked about kind of this gray area, but in the way that I do the classes, it's kind of worksheet based, where there's some lecture, some group work, some clicker type questions in there. And at the top of each worksheet are learning objectives, you know, so by the end of this topic, you should be able to interpret an equal potential contour map and identify a path of, you know, or calculate the energy from one contour to another. So things like that. So they were familiar with these ideas of like the course learning goals, and I was really impressed with how they dove into it. And it also made getting the discussion boards easier. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Okay. So at this point, it's like late October, early November. And so we use the weekly discussion board to help them get ready for choosing the problems. So they had to have an initial post, and it was related to that week's topic. That requires higher order thinking skills according to Bloom's taxonomy. So I wanted them to do more than what's the equation for, what's the equation, how do you find the equivalent capacitance of two capacitors type of thing. Oh, okay, sorry, I saw Dustin's comment about including a segment in his courses about Bloom's. Yeah, it can be a really useful framework. And so I wanted them to just, all they had to do was post the question, and these are abridged. There were more details. And then what category of Bloom's taxonomy did they think it fell into, and to explain why. And then after a couple of days, they needed to respond to 2 of their peers' posts, and for each of those responses by just doing one of the following. And so did they come to a different conclusion about Bloom's taxonomy? And if so, what was it and why? They could solve one of their peers' questions, and they could modify the question. But I also said, like, the modified question should still be solvable by Physics 8 honor students. So I wanted them to think about different ways to ask questions, and I've done this with some different in some different contexts in introductory physics classes that I've taught, and so it was really cool to see how they would modify a question to emphasize, like, well, what if it was this situation instead of that, or what would happen at an extreme of this characteristic of it. So that was pretty cool. Or they could solve a question that one of their peers had modified. And I loved how engaged they were. There was a lot of ownership. It was really rich. My TA and I were like, when we'd have our meetings every week, we just get so excited about, like, aren't the students great? Like, they're really diving into it. And somebody's raised their hand. Yes, Dustin.
What is Physics 8? Is that like the most advanced course, or is that like really graduate student level? Like, how modified are they doing?
I'm so sorry. The way that Yusimra said numbers, it's classes. It makes no sense. So Physics 8 is our Intro Physics 1. Physics 9 is our Intro Physics 2. Okay. And I'm so sorry. I automatically slipped into our course numbering.
Yeah, no worries. I just was wondering sort of how modified are they making their questions. Thank you. Yeah.
No, this is still very much intro level. So I didn't want them to, like, put in really complicated, like something that would need like tensor physics or vector calculus, multidimensional calc, that kind of stuff to solve. Yeah. Oh, and there's some cool stuff going on in the comments. And so, yeah, hopefully we can chat about stuff like that later. So this worked out really well just in terms of the discussion boards, and it really prepared them well. What I found really interesting was that the reasoning that students gave for why they classified something in a particular Bloom's level was the skills that they felt that they needed even to just understand the question, not just what the question was asking, but to understand the question. And so here we go, a couple of responses. So the second requirement for this problem is analysis. There are formulas involved, so of course calculations will also be involved. You may even need to reorganize your formulas in such a way that they can help you come to an answer. In introductory physics, there are some basic equations, and if you have to do some algebra to modify an equation, from the instructor's perspective, that's not even really considered. That's just kind of part of it. It's not considered as an advanced skill that you need to do, but the students even identifying that you had to maybe do some algebra with a formula was this higher level of Bloom's, and it really got me to. I just thought it was just really interesting how they were thinking about Bloom's. It was so different than how I'd heard any instructor or faculty member talk about it. Okay. And this is another one. I think the highest order thinking skills required definitely fall under synthesis, since the problem has several steps that all require slightly different ways of thinking to answer relatively the same question. So trying to get at this topic, the question was trying to get at the topic from these, different perspectives. They really thought, found that is higher. So analysis and synthesis, and let me just click back to the Bloom's taxonomy slide to show this. There we go. So up here in the light bulb, and with those questions, I would have thought it was kind of like more like comprehension, maybe application, but they consistently went, oops, busy street, motorcycle, don't know if you heard that, sorry. But they typically would go like, at least one, but often 2 levels higher on Bloom's taxonomy. So with I would say the project, let's see, their final project, I thought it was really successful. Everybody had to be there. The presentations were recorded, and then the Q&A live, and the students got to really see the difference in presentation styles, because we had first year as well as some second year students, and there were a couple of students, second year students, that like, I wish I could give presentations that were like that. Like this one student loves to doodle and draw, and so she was doing all this stuff with Newton's law of gravitation, and we were able to cover topics that ideally I wanted to cover, but I was running behind because things were going just much more slowly and awkwardly in this remote environment. So we were able to catch up some lost time. The students were introduced. They were engaged in teaching their section or their little topic. It was pretty much like one section of a chapter, and that was coordinated as well. So this is something that I think would be great to do in even face-to-face classes, and with my larger classes, and it can be done by using our discussion sessions or recitation sessions as well. Okay, so so one of the things that I found is that especially when it's larger, and you're not able to really have students collectively come up with a kind of rubric, giving them the rubric, but also reassuring them that we understand that they're starting off at this, if they're novices, that's still okay. And so we had this so this is what we came up with for our research activity presentations. And we, a student has to do a really, really poor job to be in the in the 70s, you know, or 60s. And when I mean really poor job, like a student is, we've had to do like literally just stand up in front of the class, say, here are my slides, and then sit back down. So they freaked out. But so yeah, a lot of this in terms of like the progress checks, and that was inspired by this American Association of Physics Teachers talk that I went to by Andy Runquist some time ago. It was about standards-based grading with voice, which I've done in some previous honors classes, but the workload became kind of crazy. I think a lot of you would probably have heard of the AAC and U-value rubrics. And then I did a lot of different reading about asynchronous discussion boards. And our CETL, that's the Center for Engaged Teaching and Learning, has, they had resources there, but also like an example of a rubric that I could use. And I found all of that to be really helpful. So, and the slide that I have hidden was just the rubric that I used for the discussion board in the regular class. And it was just like a response, and they had to actually solve a question. And it was about, they could get full credit even if they had done something like solved a question wrong, but if they were trying to apply physics principles, equations, things like that, if they were using a thorough problem solving process. And we encouraged people to, if there were mistakes, to find them and stuff. And that also worked out quite well. So, so there it is. So even by the end of the semester, I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't even sure that I was doing it really, really well. But the students all seem to survive. And there are definitely things that I want to develop and take with me in future classes, whether face-to-face or if we have to continue the remote learning. So thank you so much. And I hope we can chat about different things and things and stuff. Yes, I am very happy to share my slides. This was a question in the comments. And Steve, did you say, where are the slides posted somewhere online? Remember, you're muted.
We don't have well, we've been requested if we can put the video on to Slack, which I think we can do. It's what we used to do. We don't have a repository at the moment for the slides that we use regularly. We probably could also post them on Slack. Yeah, Marcos is shaking his head yes to that. So I guess we'll put the slides and the video on Slack. And then if you send any of us a request, we can provide a link. But at the moment, we don't have a website for that.
That's okay. I just put my email address in the chat. If you want, I am happy to share the presentation rubric, the project, like the project information sheet, expectations, has all those details along with the rubric. The information, even the research activity that we do in the intro class about finding peer-reviewed articles and annotating them, because we have parts in our discussions to even help students, you know, do all of that. And then somebody said, Jess, a little bit more about addressing potentially different preferences of students as they went through the process of coming to a collectively agreed upon decision on a syllabus structure. So grade breakdown, final project requirements. Were there times when there was no majority of agreement? And if so, how did you deal with that? So thank you. So as the instructor of record, I had veto authority. I could guide things. At one point, the way it was like if it was one person presenting by themselves, they needed to do like submit 3 questions. But if it was, and then it was one additional question for each additional person, I'm like that. So, you know, so I was able to cherry pick good ideas. And for students that, in terms of the syllabus structure, some students had questions, for example, like how the progress checks would work and how they, like, because it was brand new to them. And so much was brand new, like this was from the start an online class. They were used to quizzes and this whole unknown of a progress check. And I said, we're going to try it out. I'm going to be as transparent as I can. And if it doesn't work out, we'll figure something out. And just from that conversation, we were able to, I was able to address their concerns specifically within the discussion board. And it gave me ideas about how to be more transparent. And I'm really impressed to say that it seemed like the students trusted that I wouldn't let this, they wouldn't be screwed over. They wouldn't be put at a disadvantage by trying this, that there were different safety nets involved. So it ended up being things like, I'm just going to take the top 2 scores for this main area of the class. I'm going to take the score of this, so that it was, and here's a one, if you choose to do it, you can, it's not required. So if you want another chance to do it, because I was also getting bogged down with keeping up with things. And so, so there were ways for students to do it. Okay. Did that fully answer your question, Jess? Okay, and then looking in the chat also to see if there are some other questions.
This one from Karen concerning so anybody has tried to have students drive the direction of the course in a larger class. I know that your work was happening with about 13 students, but anybody has done it in larger courses, and how big it is too big to get consensus on broader understanding of group decisions?
Oh, okay. Well, so in the discussion boards with my large physics class, and there were, I think, 113 students enrolled in that one, so a little bit smaller than typical face-to-face. So we discussed it on the discussion board. And then as part of my lecture prep, I had these different CAT courses. CAT courses is what we call our Canvas LMS. So it's Physics 8 is Intro 1, CAT courses is Canvas, but I had a lecture prep survey. And so students voted. And so if there was like just it had to be like 60%. There had to be like kind of like a super majority type of thing for me to feel comfortable moving forward in that direction. And I did provide them, I said, like, here's percentages and weights that I'm thinking about. And so it was shifts from that. Mm-hmm.
Carrie, Tassinos has a question.
Yeah, can I piggyback on a point that Carrie made earlier with regards to the student presentations? As part of the SI, we're all well aware of the effort to not be the sage on the stage, to use student-centered pedagogy, to involve the students in every part of the class, and the learning is theirs. That is a difficult process. Everybody knows it takes time to let go of the lecturing part and give students activities to do, and that takes time, especially at the beginning of the class. And invariably, we feel that we fall behind all the time with regards to what we'd like to be in the semester. I have close to 20 semesters worth of data right now that indicates that a pre-post type thing that indicates that you give the investment, you make the investment early on in the semester to the students to learn how to think about a particular process. And then I give them a framework, for example, physiology that I teach, or physiological systems, that says, what is a system? What are the components? How do they work? What happens if they don't work well, et cetera? You give them a framework, and then you say, you take on digestive system, you take on reproductive system, you take on this, they work in groups, and you give them a framework to work, and they come and deliver these lectures that I would never have gotten to on my own, but they do this as an assignment at the end. They do a bang-up job. In other words, things they have not seen from me, they get it on their own. And that to me is a testament of how the training of students to think for themselves pays off dividends at the tail end. So I didn't want to leave what you said unaddressed, Carrie, about student presentations. They have the capacity to develop new knowledge, even if it's new to them. And that's exactly what we want to leave them at the end of a class. My 2 cents, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really impressed. Even the students that were obviously very, very novice at this and uncomfortable, doing this, they still did a good job. And we also, one of the first things that we did is like we clapped after every presentation, and we also started off with what was something good. Like what was something good or interesting about the information or the way it was presented. So we tried to make it a very supportive environment.
I think Karen had a comment. Oh, okay. Thank you, Karen.
If I may ask, so even when it's face-to-face, so I love teaching. I've been at UC Merced since 2008, and I like tweaking things here or there. But I always feel like I'm winging it. I always feel like I want to try something new and let's see how it goes. And sometimes it works out great, and other times it becomes a really good learning experience for everybody involved. But how do you all deal with trying out something new in a class? Is it just papers enough? Do you find other people that have done it? Is it somebody else on your campus that's done it? Like, how do you also kind of worry? I mean, is it just me in the back of my head going like, oh God, like they're gonna figure it out that I don't know what I'm doing? And like, how do you try new stuff? And yeah, Amy.
Well, first of all, I tell them I'm winging it. I'm completely transparent. This is not a secret. You're part of an experiment. I'm trying this. I really want to know whether it works. I want to know what it feels like when we're in the middle of it. And I'm going to ask you at the end of the semester to reflect on it. Students are, they're willing to take intellectual risks with you if you're very transparent about the purpose. If you cloud it in mystery, they're going to make up stories about why you're doing this, right? And so I just tell them. And I get ideas from my colleagues. I have really brilliant colleagues who are much more intrepid than I am in the classroom. I learn from them. I read, I come to seminars like this and I listen, and I try stuff. And a lot of it works and some of it doesn't. And I learn a lot about myself, and my students teach me the rest. So I think it's important to share I'm teaching a new course for the first time in like 3 decades this semester. And the students know it. And I just handed out a mid-course evaluation because I said, I may not be able to correct what I'm doing now, but I am teaching this again next year. So help me make it a better course. But, what's the reading level like? Is it too hard? What's the workload? What's the level of what do you want to do differently? And the biggest suggestion I got was, we're tired of our breakout rooms. I have them in project groups. And so every time I do great breakout rooms, I just send them to their project groups. We'd like to meet some other people. So I shuffled the breakout rooms, and we'd like to have more discussion. So I did that. So I think they're, and especially now during this new way of teaching for many of us, I'm perfectly honest about how I'm feeling. And I appreciate the Maslow before Bloom's. I tell them there are days when I'm not 100%. I just tell them right out. And they're okay with that. So I really believe in being explicit and transparent. And that way there's trust. I think if there's no trust, it's a terrible dynamic in the classroom. And I'm allowed to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
I'm allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah, I also try to be transparent with the students, like I'm trying this out, things like that. But I try not to, and I absolutely applaud you as well for that. I try not to let the students see how internally terrified I feel. Try to be more like, this is adventure time versus like, is this going to explode? But yeah, others? The fake it till you make it. Yeah.
This is Marcos. I have to constantly remind our students that we are still doing emergency remote instruction, that a very well organized online class would have had a lot of thought and purpose in the organization of it, and that what we're doing is not that. So online instruction is not what we're doing. We're still doing remote emergency instruction, and for them to be patient and know that some of these things are going to let me fall on my face and may not be as successful as when we have used them in class in person, and other ones translate well, and to listen to them and try to then accommodate their thoughts and ideas about how to improve things.
Can I add something that Steve Robineau said? I'm sorry, Karen, I didn't want to cut you off. Steve is a wise man, and I admire him in so many ways. I've worked with him in a variety of settings, but he said once, every person is different and every person learns differently. So something that worked very well in one year may not work at all in another year. And therefore, to some degree, we're always trying to redefine what every class is. And therefore, there's always a chance that you're going to fail within one class, even if you were walking on water in the previous year. So you always go back to, how can I connect with this group of people and how can I make them learn and move forward? And I kept that with me. He said that years ago, and I kept that with me because it's a daily reminder that you can always fall. The other part of this was, in science, we never open the right door the first time. We have to shut many doors before we open the correct one. We have more failed experiments before we find the answer to any solution to anything. So it is very possible that we'll have many failed semesters before we find, oh, this seems to work for the majority of the students. So Steve, publicly, thank you for that.
So what I was kind of following on that, or some of the same ideas. I did a project-based grade. I added projects to replace some of the exam points, and it has a rubric. It has a lot of features, and it worked great for my 2 classes in the fall, 3 classes in the fall, and it's working great for one of my classes now, and it's driving my other class up a wall, And so what I've been doing is, I really like all the ideas that have been come out, like asking to find out why it's not working in that class. And it goes to some of the idea of, you asked, Carrie, where we get our information. And no matter whether it's in conversation or here from our papers that we read, the question of context matters a lot. And we need to repeat things in many contexts to define what the best, like the core implementation practices are. Because there's implementation fidelity, but what matters may be different in my big class than my little class. And my juniors that are so point focused took this a different way than my other classes. And there's context beyond the assignment itself with some of these students, because we're in a pandemic. And so it's fascinating to me how this very similar assignment has hit differently in 5 different courses because of the context and what that context entails. So like the question of context is always really important. And please, for all of the articles you're going to write and I'm going to read, include the context and like why you think some of it matters or might not matter. Because I think that's going to help us all move forward.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that input. And looking at Liz's comment, we should also realize that BIPOC folks and women, especially as junior faculty, may struggle with getting respect in the classroom, and it may be complicated for them to show the same honesty as white men. And yeah, I've talked with a variety of faculty that that there's somehow I've been able to navigate that. I don't know explicitly what or how it is as a female in a physics classroom. I wish I could point to what it is, because I've also had other colleagues that when they were transparent like that, it did not go well.
Yeah, I'm currently teaching a class with a junior colleague, and she just talked to a student who thought that she was the TA of the class and not the co-instructor. And I have no idea in how many times I keep calling her doctor. Like, I always call her doctor and never address her by her first name in the class. She's always doctor. And I have no idea where the student that talked to her communicated that, oh, I thought you were the TA for the class. And I'm just sitting over there just like, where did the student get this idea? And yes, I'm a Latino male and she is a Caucasian woman, but I am still calling her doctor, and in the syllable she is the co-instructor of record. So I have no idea how it has gone to that. I mean, actually, we were talking about this because I noticed that a lot of the emails that the students had sent to inquire about issues in the class have only been addressed to me and never CC'd her. Very few of them are. So it happens that we were just talking about this, let's say on Tuesday, and on Thursday she said, oh, this just happened to me in office hours today. And it's like, we have to now make sure that we have an announcement to reiterate to the students that we are both co-instructors of record in the class with equal power, and that that just to make things, to expedite communication, that we both should be included in the emails, and that we are both deciding everything about the class. So it still baffles me that some student may think of my colleague as the teaching assistant when she's actually a copy. Anyway, it is 1:59. I want to thank everybody for the rich discussion that they're having. The happy hour is officially over, but I am willing to stay here for another half an hour in case that you have other questions that we want to ask or continue discussing. Otherwise, we want to thank all of you for coming and participating. I remember this is being recorded, and I got a consent from those of you who participated, just in case. But if I didn't address it directly, let me know if it's okay for us to post a recording with your participation, vocal participation. So please let us know about that. And again, it was a pleasure to have Dr. Menke here. It was a really fun presentation, gave me a lot of thoughts about what I can do differently in my classes. And it's a great conversation that we can have forward. So again, thank you, Dr. Menke, and all of you for coming and participating.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody. And again, if you want any of the materials that I put together throughout this or the research activity, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to provide that. So thank you. This was an absolute pleasure for me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great session, Carrie. Thank you. That was really
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Marcos, for co-piloting and helping out with that.
You made it very easy for me to be the co-pilot. I just stood back here and look pretty. I'm going to stop recording before I say something